evening. Welcome once again to the Stadium Journey podcast. When you're done listening to us on this podcast, remember, wear your mask. Public service announcement from yours truly. After listening to the podcast, don't forget to go to our website, stadiumjourney.com. You can follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram at Stadium Journey. And the Stadium Journey is proud to be part of the VOC Nation Radio Network. To find our back catalog of episodes, simply search VOC Nation on iTunes or Android, or you can find our library of video podcasts on Stadium Journey's YouTube channel, or check us out at vocnation.com. Remember, some of you already know this, but we simulcast our podcast live at twitch.tv/danlaw83. And you can find every podcast we've ever recorded at the Stadium Journey website. Just look under the podcast tab on the menu. And now our starting lineup, as always, is Dave Cotney. You can follow him at ProFan9. Marc is on social media at Ballpark Hunter. You can follow our producer, the above average comedian, Dan Calachico at DanLaw83. And I am Paul Baker. You can follow me at PuckmanRI. And we are very happy to be joined tonight by the author of the book, The Wax Pack, Brad Balukjian. Brad, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So, what a unique idea for your book, The Wax Pack. Why don't you tell us a little about how you came up with the idea for this book and what it entails?
Sure. So I grew up in Rhode Island in the 80s, collecting.
What? We didn't talk about that before? We'll talk.
Are you in Rhode Island right now?
I grew up in Rhode Island in the 80s as well.
All right. So I went down to the Greenville pharmacy every week with my allowance and would buy a wax pack of baseball cards. And like so many of us had thousands of them. Unlike so many of us, I was a pretty weird kid in that my favorite players were the underdog, middle relievers, bench players. I'm actually a Phillies fan, although I should be a Red Sox fan. And in that era from the Red Sox, my favorites were Tony Fossis, Dennis Lamp, Marty Barrett. So you get a sense of the guys that I liked, not Roger Clemens and Wade Boggs. So when I became an adult and as a writer, I'd always wanted to have a chance to write something at book length. And I was always curious what happened to those guys, those athletes that I grew up collecting. And so I just had this idea that a pack of baseball cards from that era kind of physically resembles a book. I mean, it's the shape. You've got 15 cards in a pack, average 15 chapters in a book. And so I thought if I could get a pack that had never been opened, it would be a great device to get a random sample of guys from that era and then turn it into this crazy road trip adventure and, say, well, I want to, not only find out what happened to these guys, but do it in person by doing this crazy cross-country road trip. So that was kind of the whole plan. Was it just started out with trying to find out what happens to baseball players when they're done. And then as I took the road trip, as you'll see in the book, a lot of these other themes ended up coming out, and it became a book that was about a lot more than baseball.
Well, yeah, so you took a random pack of baseball cards, the Topps baseball cards from what, 1986?
86, yeah.
I'm trying to remember what those cards look like in 86.
They had
those
the
like
black,
the wood bat ones?
No, that was 87. The top was black, the bottom was white with the players.
Well, anyway, you took one pack of cards, opened it up, and they tracked them down, huh?
Yeah, I drove 11,341 miles in seven weeks in the summer of 2015. And I did about 9 months of research ahead of time so I could be prepared to meet with these guys and try to set up the meetings. And, what's fun about the book is it's when I meet these guys, we do a lot of different things. Like I go to the zoo with Don Carmen, Rick Sutcliffe takes me out to breakfast and shows me where he grew up. I went on Tinder with Randy Reddy. Gary Templeton had me over to his house to watch Kung Fu movies. I get a hitting lesson from Rance Mullenix. Like it's a very, I do a lot of different activities with these guys, which I think makes the book a lot more interesting.
That is awesome. And so let's see, you mentioned a few of the guys in the pack. So yeah, your average pack of baseball cards, You've got a mix of stars, cup of coffee guys, and everything in between, huh?
Yeah, and because I mean, I knew that in general more guys are going to be the underdog types because they're just more common. It would give me a chance to write about the guys that I grew up, really as my favorites. And there, yeah, Carlton Fisk and Dwight Gooden are the biggest names in the pack, but they were actually the people I was least excited about writing about.
Right. Everybody knows their stories already.
Well, yeah, exactly, yeah. And
So-
in general, I think bigger stars have bigger egos, and they're just, as a writer, they're less interesting to me.
So as stadium journeyers, we can kind of relate to this. How many people thought you were absolutely nuts for doing this? Which is something we are all used to hearing.
Mhm.
Right. Well, I think that, yeah, generally speaking, that's true. A lot of confused reactions, even among the baseball players that I tracked down. When I first contacted them and tried to explain the idea, they were kind of confused, like, what are you doing? And you're going how far? But I think once I got face to face with most of them, and I would explain the idea of the project and the kinds of questions that I was going to ask them, they got it. They were willing to, spend time with me.
So the behind the scenes part, you came up with this idea and did the research and made the contacts and all of that before you ever knew that this was actually going to, see print and be purchased or anything like that. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, I didn't know. I mean, I knew I wanted to write a book, and I knew I was going to try to write a book. But I had no guarantees. Like when I took the road trip, I didn't have a book deal. I didn't have a contract. So it was on my own dime, and I thought, there's a very good chance it wouldn't work out. But I never stopped believing in the kind of book that I wanted to write. And so that kind of sustained me through all the setbacks.
So your trip was in the summer of 2015. Is that right?
Yeah.
So at what point did you have a finished product, and then how long until you actually got it sold and in print and in everybody's hands?
So once I got back from the trip in 2015, basically for the next 3 or so years, I was writing book proposals, and I had 2 different agents. I got rejected 38 times.
Wow, 38.
Pretty much, could have been at the end of the line. But I never stopped believing in that it was going to work. And so finally, the 39th attempt, University of Nebraska agreed to publish it. And then I actually wrote most of it in a pretty short time, about 5 or 6 months. And then it came out in April of this year. So it's been out for a couple months, and it's been really gratifying to see it, it hit the LA Times bestseller list. It's done really well. So after all those rejections, it's been really satisfying to see it do well.
Yeah, when I heard about how long it took you to sell, it boggled my mind, because maybe it's just because all of us who do Stadium Journey are crazy, and I mean, immediately, and I think like everybody else that's here thought, oh my gosh, this concept is brilliant. Who knows where this is going to, I'm just curious to see where this is going to go. It floored me to hear how long it took to sell this idea, because it's so original. It's so different.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, you realize, going through that process, I realized how risk averse the publishing industry is. And a lot of the reasons when I would get rejected, it was frustrating because they would say, well, it's a great idea. I mean, they would have the reaction that you had, but then they would say, well, you don't have 100,000 Twitter followers, and you don't have a platform to promote it. And so they make their decisions. It's brutally, based on the economics. And they say, well, if you don't have a big enough name, we don't think we can sell X number of copies in Y number of weeks. So we're not going to give you a deal. And it wasn't that they said that the product wasn't good. It was more like, oh, you're not famous, basically.
Okay. It's all about branding.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I bet 15 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have gotten a deal pretty quickly. But, I mean, you just think about when you look at what nonfiction books are selling, they're often like celebrity books, or they're,
Now, did you know that going in, that were you aware that that could have been a problem? You weren't famous enough, or you didn't have the followers, or is that just
Yeah, I thought it would be an
like a shock
obstacle.
you first heard it?
I thought it would be an
Okay.
obstacle, but I didn't know how much of an obstacle it was going to be. I mean, another thing that they said is that they didn't want me to be in the book as very much. Like if you read, in the book, I'm a very active character. My story is in there, and they're saying like, well, who cares about you? And I think, and I get where they're coming from, but I think based on the reaction the book has gotten, more people have said, well, it's really good you're in there, because the role that I play being in the book is I'm kind of the bridge between all these players. Otherwise, it's just 14 magazine profiles stapled together, right? But there has to be a through line. It's really a narrative. It's not a reference book that you pick up and you read a chapter here and there. It's one cohesive story. And I knew that the only way to pull that off would be to have my character as kind of the narrator for the whole journey.
Yeah, that must be hard to just try to explain to the publishers how important you are to be in this book. The newcomer, I see you, and here you are. People are saying, "Great, you are." This makes a lot of sense. It's almost validating that you stuck with your gut on that one.
Yeah, and then the other thing they would say is like, and again, I get where they were coming from. They would say, well, most of these players are 30 years ago, and no one cared about them 30 years ago. Like, why would someone buy a book about Don Carmen and Randy Reddy? And again, I think they were missing the point that the book is not about any one of those guys. It's not even really just about baseball. It's about these bigger storylines about fathers and sons, about like the challenge of moving on when you're done playing. These are themes that everyone can relate to, and that's the strength of the book is in understanding how much you have in common with Rick Sutcliffe and Randy Reddy and Lee Mazzilli and all these guys.
Lee Mazzilli, I remember him.
We think of them as these larger than life heroes, but really the things they deal with is the same stuff that we deal with.
Yeah. It's Rick Sutcliffe's. I'm sorry.
It's interesting that you take that perspective on the these famous guys, because having a whole lot of extra time now, ESPN has sort of made the 30 for 30s all out there and spent a whole lot of time like with the Last Dance, the Michael Jordan one, and then they had the Lance Armstrong one and the Sammy Sosa one. And to me, as compared to that, like the first year, the original, like these new ones can't hold a candle to the original ones, because it's almost like these ones now are like it's like they're trying to these high profile celebrity athletes are trying to whitewash their careers and make them prop themselves up. You got Lance Armstrong who is trying to still justify what he did and try to get people to accept that he was this, he's this super athlete. Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire, how they push the whole narrative of baseball, but really what it's doing is it's like whitewashing like their sins, and it's not nearly as interesting as those first ones, where maybe the stories weren't as well known, where you had the band from the Indianapolis Colts. Well, who cares about the band from the Indianapolis Colts? Well, until you start watching it, and then it's this is great.
Baltimore, don't take them off.
Colts, my bad. Brad, I gotta say, you did one thing with your book that is like totally challenging everything that I was taught in grade school English. So we were always taught, never judge a book by its cover. The cover of your book is brilliant. And it is immediately the thing that pulls it off the shelf. I will come clean. I didn't read your book. I did the audio version.
Yeah.
Which is even better because you do the narration, which is awesome. But before anything else, it was that cover. It just jumped out at me like a pack
Right,
of
which is, and
baseball cards.
The irony is that, you know, with this pandemic, since the book came out during the pandemic, we actually have not yet had the experience of someone going into a bookstore and seeing the cover and pulling it off a shelf. I mean, it's all been online and virtual, but I appreciate that, and I will pass it along. I mean, I had ideas about the cover concept, but the people in Nebraska, the designers, they were the ones that pulled that off. So I'll let them know they did a really good job.
Did you have to throw a couple bucks towards Topps for that design?
No, they were nice. They gave us permission to use all that.
Good to hear.
We just had to send them 6 copies of the book, and you know they were good.
Cake.
Nice.
But to your point, Dave, about the sort of the famous players. I mean, it's in a way like, so in the book, you know, I don't actually get a lot of time with Carlton Fisk, and Carlton Fisk blows me off and tells me he's not going to talk to me, and then I go through this crazy scheme where I pose as a millionaire interested in buying a house to sneak onto the golf course in Florida where he plays to ambush him. And with Dwight Gooden, I end up getting stood up by him, and I'm in his living room, but he's falling off the wagon. So, you know, I talk about all these experiences, but
wow.
You know, in a way, guys like Fisk and Gooden, who are still cashing in on their names and still living on their past fame, while they have, you know, big fan followings and people buy their jerseys and all that, there's a certain sadness to me with those guys in the long run in life that is not there with a guy like Jaime Kokenauer or Rance Mulliniks, these guys that were not the star players. And it makes you just stop and think, like, is it worth it? I mean, is it worth being that famous in the long run? Because more of your life is spent not playing baseball, even if you play a long time, than playing baseball. And, you know, seeing where these guys are now and how happy they are, I think I'd rather be the guy that was the middle reliever and have a happier life, because he's not getting up in the morning and thinking about how he's going to sell his brand as a baseball player. He's thinking about the things that the rest of us think about.
Well, you did mention you talked to Rick Sutcliffe, correct?
Yeah.
He was a very popular player, Cy Young Award winner. I think he finished 16-1 year, 84 Cubs. What was he like? Because he seems to be a guy that could be either way.
Yeah, no, he was great. I mean, he was a star player, not a Hall of Famer, but he, I think, has adjusted really well. He the story about Sutcliffe that just tells you everything about the kind of guy he is that he told me when he was done playing, he got an offer to be I believe it was the Padres pitching coach, pretty much right after he was done playing. And he said he turned down that offer and said, instead of having me do that, send me to rookie ball in like Idaho Falls.
Wow.
And I'll be the pitching coach for $20,000 a year, and I'm going to ride the bus. And he said that he had more fun that year than he had any other year in baseball. And so there's a guy that, right, he had enough self-awareness. He wasn't addicted to his own ego, where he would turn aside the obvious, you know, glamour of being at the major league level to go to rookie league ball for no money, because he knew that that's where he would be happier.
He was very humble. I know Jim Bunning did that as well. He wanted to be a coach in the major leagues, and he decided to go to AAA and ride the bus as well. So that's just, yeah. And I'm sure that'd make a great book too, if Sutcliffe ever decides to make that book.
Well, I think it was, you know, also when I was meeting these guys, like, so when I met Lee Mazzilli, for example,
Lee Mazzilli, I know him.
the obvious questions to ask Lee Mazzilli are, you know, tell us about the '86 World Series, and, you know, and I intentionally didn't ask those questions, right? Because that's what he expects, and he's got an answer he's got an answer holstered, which is the same cliche he said for 30 years. And so what I would do when I would meet with these guys is I had like a whole stack of articles about their career, and I would put it in front of them and say, I've read this entire file on you, and I feel like I know nothing about you. And they'd be like, what? Like, that's not what they expect to hear. And I was making the point that, like, I know you've been trained to say nothing to the media for years. Like, your job was to not to be forthcoming and honest with the media. I get it, but I know I'm not interested in rehashing the same baseball stories. Like, I want to know, the stuff that you haven't been asked, the personal stuff, the what it's like as a human, not just as a player. And I think that part of why guys opened up as much as they did in the book is because I wasn't a sports writer with the traditional questions that they would expect. And so I kind of maybe caught them off guard a little bit with that. And also that I was very conscious about trying to make, again, get out and do things, make it participatory. So I'm not just sitting across a table staring at a guy for 2 hours. We're actually doing activities together.
Okay, now Brad, you have. I'll admit I have not read the book yet, but you have absolutely piqued my interest because you've taken this, and it's not a baseball book anymore. It's stories about adjusting to life after baseball, and it just made me think. For several years, I worked with an ex-major league player, and we used to have these kind of conversations all the time. And I remember one meeting that we were in, and they asked everybody around the table to go and describe, what would your dream job be? And so, everybody has their thing, and we get to this ex-major league player. He says, I already had my dream job. But he's actually he's been able to transition to life after baseball very successfully. He runs a baseball school, among other things. He's got a full-time job, working with people with mental illness. So, and what you said to me just resonated so much. Like, they're happy.
Right.
So, what are some of the success stories that you saw from people, or the not so successful people that transitioned after baseball?
Well, I think in the book I call baseball players accidental Buddhists, because basically Buddhism means you're in the present moment. Your head's not in the future, you're not in the past, you're right where you are. And in order to be successful, baseball players kind of have to know how to do that, because there's so much failure every day. You have to let go of the strikeout immediately, and you have to just stay on the present moment. The guys that did well after baseball applied the same philosophy, in that it was about letting go of the play. I mean, Randy Reddy had this great line where he said, when he quit playing, he said it was time to go home and learn everyone's name, which are his family. But also, he said he didn't go right back into coaching because he had to get the player out of him first, right? He had to let go of that player identity, and he had to accept that that's gone and it's no longer there. And I think, and then like Steve Yeager said how he was so depressed the first year after he stopped playing, but he also recognized his demons were alcohol, and he poured out all of his booze in the year that he quit playing and hasn't had a drop since. Gary Templeton did pretty much the same thing. So you see these guys that have this sort of self-awareness and decided, okay, I'm going to accept what I can't control, and I'm gonna move on and let it go. And to your point also, these guys were actually, and this may disappoint some people, but they weren't terribly nostalgic. Like Gary Templeton, I put in, I was at his house, and I put in a DVD from the 1984 NLCS between the Padres and the Cubs, and he lasted about half an inning, and he's like, turn this shit off. And he said, he was like, I don't want to watch this. He's like, I know what happened. And so, we have this sort of fan perspective where we're so curious about what do these guys think about this and that. And they're like, they don't want to talk about it. And it's like, but I get that. I get that, like, unless they're with the guys they played with, like if you saw Gary Templeton at a reunion with, Greg Nettles and, whoever the guys were on that, Alan Wiggins, whoever the guys were on that team, they would have fun talking to each other, but they're not really interested in revisiting that with the fans. And that's something that I didn't expect that I picked up on.
Yeah, because I know Gary Templeton was when he was in St. Louis, he claimed he was misquoted a lot of times. He had a lot of run-ins with Whitey Herzog, which prompted the trade to San Diego.
Well, actually, so that story is front and center, and that's what that chapter is all about. And when you read that chapter, you'll have a whole new perspective on Gary Templeton.
Yeah, and I think
he tells that whole story from his perspective, and it's actually really disturbing that he got saddled with this reputation when you hear the whole story.
Yeah, and I think I know because it maybe was an excerpt from your book that I read somewhere online, and my wife and I were talking about that. She's African American, and she brought that up to me, and I'm like, wow, I've never really heard that story before. The Ladies' Day eruption of 82 or 81. Yeah, 81 it was. So okay.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned, Brad, that you became a central character in the story. And I would say for me as a reader / listener, one of the things that kind of surprised me is how introspective towards yourself and comparing to all of these other characters, how that they all sort of intertwine. Now, when you did that sort of surprise you, how you found yourself sort of confronting some of these challenges that you've had current when you were a kid, and how I mean, I would assume that writing this was really like therapeutic for you. Did that surprise you how that turned out?
Yeah, I mean, I almost looked at it like, I mean, I was thinking about this as I went into it, was like, okay, I'm at the time I was 34, single, not, no kids, not really sure where I'm headed. And I realized, like, I'm the same age that these guys were when they retired. Like, pretty much all these guys retired around age 35, 34, 35, 36. So I almost looked at it like, I'm going to go and I'm going to like use these guys as my mentors. I'm going to go seek out advice from these ex-players about when they were in my shoes and they were at their own crossroads, being in their mid-30s, what did they do, or what mistake, what can they tell me about what's next? Which is even cooler when you think about these are actually the guys, who I collected their baseball cards as a kid. But in a way that took them off the pedestal a little bit. So I was meeting up with Gary Templeton, and I wasn't looking at Gary Templeton, all-star shortstop. I was looking at, hey, this is a dude in his mid-50s who's had a lot of experience. What can I learn from him about, again, things beyond, about marriage, about kids, about life? And when I would meet up with these guys, I was willing to share that about myself. And so I would say, like, hey, I would talk about my own issues and flaws and dealing with OCD and all these, we've all got something we're dealing with. And I would open up about that. And I think that would, again, set the tone about, would help them be more comfortable opening up about their own stuff, and when they realized it was not just about, trying to relive baseball games.
And not to spoil too much. I mean, I went through, and basically it's structured like each player is essentially their own kind of chapter as you're going through. Yeah. And I went through a couple chapters going like, this guy said this to the author? Are you serious? Like,
yeah.
This is not public knowledge. This is deeply personal stuff. This is
right.
This is shocking.
Right. And there are those moments a couple of times, like Don Carmen, who was my favorite player as a kid. Some of the stuff that he revealed was truly shocking. I mean, and disturbing, but at the same time cathartic, because it was about his healing process. And Paul, you were saying you're a psychologist and you dealt with former major leaguers. Well, Don Carmen, who's really kind of the star of the book, I think, and is just truly exceptional. He, when he quit playing baseball, was extremely depressed, realized, as he put it, he's like, all of a sudden I realized that like drinking had become my hobby, and I didn't even know it. But kind of stopped drinking, went back to school, got his bachelor's in psychology, got his master's in sports psychology, working on his doctorate in sports psychology. His job is now he's the staff therapist for Scott Boras. So he goes around and, when Bryce Harper and Steven Strasburg go into a slump, as they do, like everyone does, his job is to go get on at least in the non-COVID world, get on a plane, fly to whatever town Bryce Harper is in, go to the hotel, spend an hour with him and triage his issues, his mental issues. And so Carmen in particular has this really different way of looking at everything and, seeing the big picture of baseball and life. And then he reveals to me, again, this trauma of abuse from his childhood and how that affected who he was as a pitcher, but who he is now as a therapist.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to start off and say, well, Brad's going to go through this adventure, and he's going to come across more than one person, big time professional athletes with that machismo toughness exterior. He's going to come across a couple of them who are going to be brought to tears.
Right.
Nobody picking up that book when they start is going to be expecting that. I mean, I sure wasn't expecting it. And it was, to me, it was huge. Absolutely huge.
Yeah, no, that to me is the best part of the book, or the best, and I didn't expect it. I mean, I knew I'd done enough research to know kind of what I wanted to ask guys, but I didn't know how it was going to go. I mean, so, as you see in the book, some of the things I asked, they could have gone south. I mean, they could have really not been happy with me. So, testament to their openness.
Biggest surprise on this adventure?
I go back to the Templeton stuff, hearing the whole story about how he was really sort of the racial stuff where he was hung out to dry. And then Rick Sutcliffe, I mean, there's this moment when I'm riding in his car. So it was great. He took me around, drove me all around where he grew up in suburban Kansas City. And one moment we're in the car chatting and his phone rings, and I look down and I see on the screen, it says Ryan S. And I was like, is that fucking Ryan Sandberg right now? And he's like, yeah. And then he hits ignore. And I'm like, wow, he just screened Ryan Sandberg for me. And so, but we're riding along, and it's actually towards the end of our time together. And he's talking about his dad, who was this race car driver, and his dad ran out on the family when he was like 11 and never really saw, that was the end of their relationship. And Sutcliffe is telling me about how he was so hurt by what his dad did to him that when he was in Dodger camp as a rookie and he met guys like John Drysdale and Sandy Koufax that were these like supposedly so intimidating guys, he said none of them scared him at all because, he had been so impacted by what happened with his dad. And he has this line in there where he says something like, I know what a piece of shit is, when talking about his dad, and I know what not to be. And in the context of talking about his relationship with his daughter. And it was like, you could still, the pain was so palpable in the way he phrased that. But yet it was so encouraging to see the generational change of what these guys, how they did not repeat the same mistakes that were done to them with their kids. And that was one of the nice things is, like with Steve Yeager, I got to meet his son and spend some time talking to both Yeager and his son, and I could see firsthand how close they are.
So since we're on this is the Stadium Journey podcast, let's talk a little bit about the journey to meet 15 players scattered around the continent. You said that you ended up taking 11,000 miles on your car. Was that right?
Yeah.
So that's like one of Dave's spring break trips, I guess. 11,000 miles. So how far did you end up going? Where? Across?
Well, so I live in Oakland, California. I went down south to San Diego, across in the south, but then I kind of doubled back to go to this little town in Oklahoma where Don Carmen grew up, and kind of retrace his childhood. Met up with his mom and his brothers, and then go back on the road and go to Florida, up the eastern seaboard, all the way to Cooperstown, New York. That's where I actually managed to finally catch Carlton Fisk. And then I go west, back across the Midwest, and back to Oakland.
Okay, so you did all these interviews on one trip. It wasn't 15 separate.
Yeah, it was
hookups.
one giant road trip. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. So let's talk ballparks. Since this is Stadium Journey, we're in the business of talking about ballparks. What are some of your favorite places that you've visited as a baseball fan?
Probably shouldn't be a surprise given my affection for the underdog that I love the Oakland Coliseum, even though it's probably the biggest dump in Major League Baseball. I mean, so first of all, it's 10 minutes from where I live. And as someone that, this may be like heresy to you guys with your, how much you put on the stadium, but to me, like just the field is the field. And so even if the Coliseum is what it is, when I get up there, and, it's funny that they've been talking about the social distancing. If they let fans in the park, would everyone be sitting, every other seat or whatever? And I say that at the Coliseum, you don't need to impose that, because I've had an entire section to myself just in an average game. I go up high and I have the entire upper deck. So I've spent many days hanging out, watching. To me, baseball is just so very meditative. I like to go by myself. I like to go score the game, go to the upper deck, and just sort of get into my zone. On the trip, I went to Busch Stadium, which was a beautiful facility. I mean, that whole Cardinal complex is, the Hall of Fame. And I mean, that's like baseball fandom at its most vibrant, I think. I mean, it was a community experience going to that stadium. I appreciated that. Growing up, I, as a Phillies fan, went to Veteran Stadium. I've been to the new ballpark there in Philadelphia. It's a really nice facility, but I've been to probably 10 stadiums in my life, but haven't been to that many, actually, considering I'm a pretty big baseball fan.
Yeah, there's nothing like your hometown ballpark, though, even if it's Oakland.
Well, here's the crazy thing. Last year, I got tickets to every game at the Coliseum for $280 the whole year.
Whoa.
Or the price
that
of
would make it awesome.
One game at Fenway.
Yeah, 81 games plus every game 50% off all concessions.
Oh man.
I mean, I didn't go to 81 games, but yeah, I could have. It's just incredible.
10 minutes.
Even
from the
beer.
bar.
Even the beer was 50% off.
Beer. You can go to. They had a bar. You go to the bar. They had this really cool clubhouse bar. You could get any drink you wanted half off. Yeah.
So you've got to be like totally against a new ballpark, because there's no way in hell you're going to be getting that kind of deal at a new park.
Well, no, the thing is, it's going to be if they build it, it'll be a great facility, I'm sure, and beautiful, but it will price out a lot of people that go to the A's games. I mean, it's going to be a whole different, it'll be like San Francisco going from Candlestick to, Oracle.
Yeah.
And the crowd has changed there. But no, I mean, it was so much so that I had buddies that would go after work just to go to the bar at the Coliseum, just to get, as if it was their happy hour, because they would get half off. Forget the game, they would just go to the bar.
Isn't that like the whole marketing strategy behind, 25 Major League Baseball teams? Like, who cares if there's a game? Just come on into the bar.
Right.
Minor League Baseball.
So, yeah, Wax Pack. It sounds like it would lend itself easily to a sequel or to translate it to other sports. Any plans to try to do something like this again, Brad?
No, I think too many people try to go back to the well. To me, it's like the novelty is gone. I mean, I don't think I could top the first effort. So creatively, it's not interesting to me to go do a direct sequel. But I think there's a lot more that you could do around. I mean, again, back to your point, Dave, about the 30 for 30 series, like the charm of those early shows was the obscure, unknown stories. And there's so many, I mean, there's so many of those in sports that they're still untold. And I think, that's what attracts me, is digging up those lesser known stories.
You mean you're not like me? You're not looking for looking forward to the 10-part Tom Brady 30 for 31. That's going to be
Exactly.
really dull.
I would sooner watch it. I'd rather watch a Scott Zolak 10-part series.
Oh, you obviously don't live out here anymore, Brad, because Scott's on the radio every day, and man, I can't listen to him.
Oh, really? Well, I'm going back to being a backup quarterback on like the '89 Patriots, or
I saw the best tweet today. Somebody put up, geez, being the backup quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs has got to be a sweet gig right now.
Yeah, right.
So what other projects you have in the? Oh, sorry, Dave. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
What other projects you have in the works right now, Brad? If you want to share that with our listeners.
Yeah, so I don't have any imminent book things, but one cool thing is that we were talking before the show about stealing home, and several of us that have baseball books that were affected by the pandemic, we formed this club called the Pandemic Baseball Book Club. And so me, Jason Turbo, who's written about the A's and the Dodgers, Eric Nussbaum, who wrote Stealing Home, Anika Orrock, who wrote about the Women's League. We're up to 24 authors now. And it's been really cool. Like, in general, writers tend to be kind of competitive, kind of irritable, hyper competitive people. So the fact that we all got together and we're all going to like promote each other's books, we're not going to do the usual thing, has been really great. So we've done a series of panels, podcasts, video interviews, and the whole premise of it is like, you promote someone else, you promote everybody wins kind of thing. So we're continuing to build that out, doing more, trying to bring in more guests onto the show, and just seeing where it goes. So if you go to pbbclub.com, it's all of our stuff.
I will say this, since February 29th is like a date that is ingrained in my brain. It was the last live sporting event that I got to, Rochester Nighthawks lacrosse. So since then, I have, Paul, you can help me out here. I've probably done about 10 to 15 book reviews. And I would say clearly, the Wax Pack is the best thing I've read this year.
Well, thank you.
Dave, we already got him on the show. You don't have to kiss his butt.
No, hey, I'm saying, go out, read it. The audio version is fantastic. I love it when the actual writer does the narration.
I got to say, like, that's something, like, it is hard to record an audiobook. You have no idea. Like, every page I probably made an average of 15 mistakes because they're picking up every single little imperfection. Well, and you have to immediately stop and re-record. But I'm glad I did it.
I imagine it would be super tedious, but I can't recommend this book enough. It is so refreshing. You start off with, I'm going to read this baseball book about these weirdos or whatever, these guys I've never heard of. Well, let's be honest, when you started off the chapter with Rance Mulliniks, I was hooked. 85 J's, 92 J's. Good job.
Plus I passed out on the side of the freeway drunk in the first chapter. So
that's true.
You keep selling. You keep selling, Brad. You got me.
But it was, I was absolutely delighted and surprised where the book went. I had no idea it was going to go where it did, and it was an absolute delight. My wife also liked it because it gave me a reason to go out and do the gardening. So she was happy I'd listen to the book. I'd be out in the yard cleaning up, reading and stuff. So
Nice.
go out, read it, pick it up, listen to it, whatever. You got to do it.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, I really appreciate that. It's so gratifying now just to repeat, after 6 years, like just to get the response is really nice.
Yeah, and I can tell you, Brad, I'm one of the editors for our website, and I've had 2 of our authors submit reviews of your book because we're trying to build up content. So we got into book reviews, and we got a double here. I don't know what to do with the second review now, but
Excellent.
Speaks to the power of the subject to sports fans. So before we let you go, Brad, again, thanks for coming on. Do you want to pimp out your social media channels where our listeners can follow you or find you, and the Pandemic Book Club and all of that good stuff? Yeah,
so waxpackbook.com, you can get the links to getting the book. Book's pretty much available wherever books are sold, as they say. And at waxpackbook on Twitter. And then pbbclub.com is for the Pandemic Baseball Book Club. So check it out.
Fantastic. I don't know if we should spend a few minutes talking about Rhode Island since we both grew up there. You said you were from...
You're not there anymore?
I'm actually in Massachusetts, but not too far away. I could drive 5 minutes and be back in Rhode Island. I grew up in Tiverton. So.
Oh, great.
So the opposite side of the state, if there could be an opposite side of Rhode Island.
Yeah, right. Everything's only 45 minutes away, but yeah.
Exactly. So thanks again for coming on, Brad. We were glad to have you. And Wax Packs, everybody, check it out. Sounds like a great book.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right, Brad. Have a good one.
Thanks.
All right, guys. Brad Balukjian, Wax Packs. He got me hooked, so I got to go pick up that book now. Babe, maybe you can send me your audiobook so I can return all the books you got or something.
I could probably do that.
Yeah, but we actually, for the first time, last week we had one ballpark trip to talk about. We have more ballpark trips to talk about this week. So, Marc, you want to lead us off? You got a couple?
No, I don't have any.
Oh, I thought the 2 was for you have 2 places you went.
I was planning on going to Louisville to see the opening of their soccer stadium, but they were not giving out press credentials at the moment, and tickets are very limited and not available. So, yeah, no ballparks. I'm just waiting for the Lemonade League to open up and maybe checking out a Chicago Dogs game, maybe a Joliet game, just playing it by ear.
All right. And Dave, you said you haven't been to a ballpark or a stadium since February 29th?
Pretty much. Well, I did take my son to the ballpark yesterday, but that was just, him and I on the dirt, throwing the ball, hitting the ball.
Yeah.
So I guess it's just me then, because last week
you're the big winner.
I actually, big trip winner.
Big trip
to Nashua, New Hampshire, and New Britain, Connecticut. So we actually, the Futures League, we took 2 trips to Nashua. I'll talk about that in a second. The Futures League, which is a summer collegiate wooden bat league, has started up play. They started up on July 2nd. Normally they have 7 teams in the circuit. This summer, 6 of the teams are playing. The Pittsfield Suns decided not to make a go of it this summer. And they started up, like I said, on July 2nd with games in Nashua, New Hampshire, the Silver Knights, and the New Britain Bees, which were last year in the Atlantic League. The Atlantic League team folded. They moved a team into the Futures League at New Britain Stadium, where the Rock Cats used to play. So they've had baseball there for over 20 years now. They started in New Hampshire and Connecticut because the other 4 teams in the league are located in Massachusetts. And Massachusetts COVID restrictions are, far more restrictive than the other 2 states. They have actually started home games. Those 4 teams have actually started home games, but without fans. So the North Shore Navigators closed their first game off to fans. The Brockton Rocks did the same thing, but at the last minute, they made 100 tickets available. So they played their home opener today in front of 100 people. And then you've got the Worcester Bravehearts, who usually play at Fitton Field on the campus of Holy Cross in Worcester. But since the Holy Cross campus is closed, they can't play there. So they are playing this summer in Doyle Field in nearby Leominster, which is actually a former home park in the league. And then the other team is a new team last year, the Westfield Starfires. They play at Billy Bullins Field, which is a Babe Ruth League championship. They played the Babe Ruth championships there, I think. And it's a 1,000-seat ballpark. I don't know what their plans are for this summer. So the Massachusetts teams are kind of hit and miss. But we were able to take a couple trips to Holman Stadium in Nashua, which was the home of the first integrated minor league baseball team in the United States. The Nashua Dodgers in 1946 had Roy Campanella and Don Newcomb play for the team. And they have murals up honoring those players, and their numbers are retired. And then, like I said, New Britain, which was formerly an affiliated minor league park, then an independent park. Now, with the runaway success that is the Hartford Yard Goats, New Britain, the Bees, the professional Bees, didn't stand a chance. We're drawing next to nothing, and so they couldn't make go of it. They folded. Now they're trying the Summer Collegiate League, which has far less overhead than a professional team does. So we've talked about those ballparks before. I won't get into much detail about the ballparks themselves because nothing much is different there. But what I do want to let people know about is what it's like to go to a ballpark during a pandemic. So like I was talking about with the other teams, capacity is really greatly reduced. Connecticut is allowing New Britain Stadium to fill 25% capacity. So it's 1,500 fans. Supposedly they had 1,500 fans for opening night. I was there for their second game on a Sunday afternoon, and official announced attendance was about 500. I would say it was half of that. I would guess it was about 250, 300 fans there the night I was there. So plenty of room to spread out in a 6,000-seat stadium, 300 fans. You have plenty of room to socially distance. Holman Stadium, on the other hand, they capped their attendance at 500. Funny story, we were going to go to opening day on the Thursday. Checked that out. Looked like they had plenty of tickets left. So we drove from my house up to Nashua, which is about a 90-minute drive. Got to Nashua, sold out. So somewhere between leaving Dartmouth, Mass, and getting to Nashua, New Hampshire, they sold their last ticket. So we found a beer pub and ate, and then turned back around. Went back up the next night actually, and caught the game. Like I said, they capped out 4,000-seat ballpark, capped it at 500 fans. So again, plenty of room to spread out.
Did you ever think you would see the day you would go to a sold-out Nashua Silver Knights game?
I have been to big crowds. I've been to Holman Stadium many times over the years. I mean, going all the way back to the Nashua Pride of the Atlantic League. So I have seen big crowds there.
Yeah.
It's funny. What did somebody put on one of the baseball groups? They called it a pandemic-induced sellout. So the reduced capacity, it's like an asterisk next to it. So what it's like to be at the game, both ballparks were very similar in the fact that you had to wear your mask at all times when you were wandering around the stadium. When you got to your seats, you could take them off. But if you were going to the concessions, the restrooms, in or out, if you were just walking, stretching your legs, had to have your mask on. Ushers were enforcing that rule very strictly. And I've talked to some people in other parts, like the Midwest. Is it the Midwest League? Northwoods League? Northwoods. They're going, and people have said they've seen very few masks at those games. Not the case in New England. Everybody had a mask, and there were no issues that I saw with anybody wearing it. A couple times, guys had a couple beers in their hands, forgot they didn't have their mask on, but no real issues. What else was different about it? Some of the things we take for granted at minor league ballparks now. T-shirt tosses, giveaways, between innings shenanigans, none of it. That stuff was all cut. So it's a very old-timey, more of a purist atmosphere. You don't see a lot of the extraneous stuff, which I appreciate. I don't like all the extra noise and stuff, but it does give the ballpark a different kind of feel.
Should have had you guys all wearing those like cardboard hats and striped shirts and bow ties. It would have been like back in the 20s.
Yeah, that's how my mom likes the games. No noise. She likes it quiet.
Yeah, so if you like that, I mean, you'll like the presentation. Holman Stadium, actually, the vomitories, for those of you who do not know what the word vomitory is, there's a vocabulary lesson. Vomitory is the tunnels that bring you in or out of a stadium.
Wow, I did not know that.
Those little hallways, those are called vomitaries. I learned that at Candlestick Park. And it's one of my favorite words. I throw it into a Stadium Journey review whenever I can. But anyway, the vomitories. Those were one way. So you could either go in or out. They didn't want people to accidentally end up face to face.
I never knew that. Vomitory.
Yeah. Bathrooms. Every other urinal closed off. Every other sink closed off. Social distancing, as you would expect, like at concession stands. Everybody 6 feet distance when possible. Ticket lines, entering and exiting the stadium, same thing. I don't know how it would be in other parts of the country, but the 2 games I was at, everybody was very respectful of the 6 foot rule. And actually, funny story in New Britain, we went to take a picture with the mascot. We had to take a social distance picture. I put that up on Stadium Journey, actually. So you can see Pam and I are there posing for the picture. We got our masks on, and the Sting, the New Britain Bee, is standing about 6 feet behind us. Pretty humorous. So, yeah, different atmosphere, but it just felt so great to get that little bit of normalcy back in, to be at a ball game. Felt really good. But that's what you can expect. If you're lucky enough to go to a ballpark. So those were my trips. Like I said, nothing exciting about the ballparks, new or exciting at Holman Stadium or New Britain Stadium. But great to be at the ballpark, and I hope that the league continue to operate, and we can all get a little bit of normalcy back in our lives. Because I heard the weekend that we were off gallivanting to our games, 2 games up in the Northwoods League got canceled. I heard the Milwaukee Milkmen had to call off their game last minute.
Yeah, American Association of the Milkmen.
Yeah, and the Traverse City Pit Spitters had to cancel a game because several players tested positive.
Yeah.
So if you are planning to go to a game, stay plugged into the social media. So
yeah, and that's interesting because that's one of the places. Because Traverse City is a 6-hour drive from me, and my plans, hopefully, with the next 2 weeks, is to head to Lansing because they have a college wood bat league called the Lemonade League, which got a lot of attention this week on Stadium Journey. Thank you for all who read it. And I was going to go there. Battle Creek, which is about a half-hour away, they have a wood bat league too in the Northwoods League team, and then 3 hours north to Traverse City. But you're right, don't want to drive 3 hours north if there's no game to see. So definitely check out our website or check out the Twitter page of each team. They'll tell you what's going on.
Well, I learned my lesson driving to Nashua for nothing, and that was only a 90-minute drive. I can imagine a several-hour drive.
Even the big guns, the bubble sports.
Right.
FC Dallas is pulled out of the MLS tournament, and not the first game, but the second game. So it's going to be the late game. Nashville and Chicago, that's being postponed. And Toronto FC, this is killing me. Toronto FC was going to play their first game on Friday, and they are postponed until Sunday as well. So it's the whole thing, whether it's Major League Soccer, Major League Baseball, National Hockey League, NBA, or your smaller baseball leagues that are still trying to make a go of it. It's all one giant house of cards, and
it is. You're absolutely right.
1 or 2 cards could go, and the whole thing could just fall apart. So yeah, definitely.
So a little advice from us to anyone planning a trip: stay plugged into social media, pay attention, because things are it's like trying to go to college baseball here in the Northeast. It could change at a moment's notice. So I guess that's where we're going to wrap it up for tonight. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And first of all, thanks to Brad Balukjian for joining us tonight. Dan, our producer, is not live on the call. So if you want to follow him on social media, check him out at danlaw83. Marc, how about you? Where can you be found on social media? And I think you told us a little bit about where you were planning to go.
Yeah, I was planning on going to Louisville to see soccer, but that got nixed. And I'm hoping for the Lemonade League in Lansing, which would be Battle Creek, and hopefully Traverse City. If that doesn't work out, I can visit the relatives and check out Joliet, the Chicago Dogs of the American Association, and the Northwest Indiana Oilmen. I think they're having most of the games in that league at their stadium. Well, if that happens, and I'm just waiting to get clearance and make the move, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and on my very own YouTube page where I review ballparks and talk about them, Ballpark Hunters. So hit the subscription button, give me a like, tell me how you like my videos. Ballpark Hunter at YouTube.
Dave, how about you? Any stadium journeys planned, and where can our listeners follow you?
Well, I am trying to plan a socially distant outdoor watch party for the Toronto FC's first game on television. It was planned for Friday, but now that first game is going to be Sunday morning. Not the best time for an outdoor watch party. So I'm hoping to get the Montreal-Toronto game, which is a week from tomorrow. We'll see how that goes. But the literary journey continues. Just finished the one book that Brad was talking about, Stealing Home. Really interesting about the Dodgers and how the land for Dodger Stadium was acquired. Didn't really see where that one was coming from. That one was pretty surprising. And I just finished a book called Blood Feud about the Avalanche and the Red Wings and their rivalry, which could arguably be one of the best in sports for that short period of time. It was pretty rough. So I got some book reviews to get going up on the site, and I just picked up this one today. Come on, you Reds, about the history of Toronto FC and right up to when they won their first MLS Cup. So you can follow all of that stuff at Twitter at ProFan9. You could go to Instagram, but I haven't put up anything since, February 29th.
February 29th. I'm trying to think when the last game I went to. I think it was like March 10th or so. It was a few days before everything shut down.
Dude, the last game you went to was last weekend, so don't even go there.
Well, no, before then. I mean, before then. I was at a Celtics game, and we had our Boston Pride playoff game right before everything shut down. So yeah, so my drought was a lot shorter than yours. And you can follow my stadium journeys on Twitter or Instagram at PuckmanRI. Where will I be over the next 2 weeks? I have plans to go to Futures League games in Worcester, well, technically Leominster, Massachusetts, and Westfield, but that's all going to depend on the state of Massachusetts and whether they continue their restrictions on allowing fans at games. If not, the Newport Summer Collegiate League is starting this weekend at historic Cardines Field in Newport, Rhode Island. So I may head on down there. That's one of my favorite places to go catch a game. Now, Mark, you were talking about all these great names and like the Lemonade League and stuff. The Newport League today announced the names of their 4 teams that are playing. Get ready for this, guys. The 4 teams that are playing in Newport this summer are black, white, blue, and orange. Fancy stuff there. So until next time, check out our website, stadiumjourney.com. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Stadium Journey. You can find the Stadium Journey podcast at VOC Nation, or just search VOC Nation on iTunes or Android. Check out all the video simulcasts of our podcast on our YouTube page, and you can watch us record live at twitch.tv/danlaw83. And we will all return in 2 weeks. That will be July 21st, for those of you keeping score. We will be joined by Emma Tiedemann, the Director of Broadcasting for the Portland Sea Dogs. So we're very looking forward to that very much. Again, thanks to Brad Balukjian for joining us tonight. For Dan Calachico, for Marc Viquez and Dave Cotney, I am Paul Baker. Until next time, everyone, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Wear your masks.